Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will begin shortly, but before the meeting begins, I'd like to make a few announcements. First, if anybody wants to address the governing board, we have kiosks located against the right wall as you approach the auditorium entry. Staff are available to assist you in case you need any assistance. If you are registered to address the board, please watch the screen for your name in the list that appears on the left side. And when the item comes up that you have registered to speak, please be present. Please keep the back wall of the auditorium clear at all times per our fire code. In the event of an emergency, the primary exits are located at the rear of the auditorium on either side. And during an earthquake, drop to the ground in front of your seat or lean forward as much as possible. Cover your head with your arms and hold your neck with both hands. During an event requiring shelter in place, please remain in your seat and follow the directions of South Coast SCAQMD staff. Thank you. Those are the administrative updates, and we will begin shortly.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to open the April 5th, 2019 Governing Board meeting of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. I would like to ask Supervisor Perez if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please join me in salute our nation's flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Do we have any opening comments by any board members?
Yes.
Go.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, I attended the California Fuel Cell Partnership that was held in Torrance. And one of the things that was stated that currently there are 39 stations approximately that are up and running on board now. There's 24 that are still in the pipeline to come out very shortly. The number of cars are steadily increasing. They had new members. The budget itself that they are operating off of is $1.3 million, with our agency contributing approximately $50,000 per year for that endeavor. So it's one of the things that they are very much concerned about is that with CARB's new regulation that went into effect, not regulation, but mandate, by, I believe it's 2035, that all school buses and large fleets must be at zero emissions. And to do that with batteries for heavy-duty trucks and buses would almost be impractical without fuel cell without the aid itself of a fuel cell engine that will be able to accommodate that. So they are making great progress in that regard. And I think it's one of those kind of things that we feel we should take great pride in, is that we have really been very instrumental. We've supported them. I think we have one of their staff here. We give an office itself too. Is that correct, Mr. Nastri?
We work very closely, yes.
Yes. So I think that it's something that the agency should be very proud of because we're going to be able to help to bridge that gap in getting to that particular mandate.
Is that it?
Well, last Saturday, we had a convention, not a convention, but a meeting itself of a celebration of Cesar Chavez Day. I think it was approximately about 300 people plus that was there. And we had an opportunity to give a plaque to Mr. Arturo Rodriguez, who is the past president. He recently resigned in December 2018, but who took over from Cesar when he passed away in 1993. And he started with him back really shortly after the agency, Cesar started the agency, I think in 1995 or 1996, and he was president since that point in time of Cesar's death up until now. That's it. Thank you.
I was going to ask Paul, you can't show a picture from my phone on the camera, can you? Okay. Because I wanted to congratulate Mr. Alatorre that the Cesar Chavez event was really something. It really was something. You know, you've done a great job at that event for a number of years. So at that event, Clark is always asking me, you know, he calls me like once a month and says, you know, how many pictures do you have in your phone now? Because for all the years I was an amateur photographer, I was out trying to take more pictures of Bingham, right? So I have 41,000 pictures in my phone. But if Paul could, this is one of my favorite. This picture is absolutely one of my favorite. And so everybody thinks that's a picture of Cesar Chavez. He is actually a minor character in that picture. The picture is really about the woman in the center because she didn't know I existed at that time. She just thought I was some little guy running around, and she was up there, you know, doing pro bono legal work for Caesars. In those days, it was so long ago, you know, you had to go home and develop the film and then print the picture. It was back in those days. So when I was that night printing that picture, I looked at that picture and I said, man, to myself, what does a guy do to deserve a woman like that?
Keep wondering that.
Hey. Well, 47 years later, I'm still working at it every day. Because that was Mrs. Burke back in the day when she was Mrs. Watson. So, you know, Caesar was just another guy who happened to be in the photograph. So it was a great event, and I did think, you know, I'm going down there and get Larry next year. I'm gonna drag him out of his house and take him and his wife down to that event. I know they'd have a good time. And the way Larry eats, we might have to increase the budget a little bit, but you know, it'll be worth it. Okay. Any other comments by any other board members? Yes, Ms. Mitchell.
I just want to mention that a couple weeks ago in Sacramento, I was there in connection with the Air Resources Board meeting, and CalSTART had an event at the convention center, and the Tesla truck was on display there. So I met with some of the Tesla representatives and got a good look at that truck. The truck cab is really interesting. It's like empty. There's nothing in there except there's one seat where the driver sits, two screens, one in front of the driver and one slightly to his right. And then there is a fold-down seat, so someone else could join the driver in the cab, and the rest just empty. And so, you know, I was asking the Tesla people, do you have to specially train the drivers to drive this? There is some special training, but it's a much easier vehicle to drive than the big trucks that are out there now on the road. And so they have a number of these out, and they are now working with them to, in experimental phases, to determine how much load they can carry, how far their range is with certain loads, and how long it takes to charge. And they haven't been certified by CARB yet, but they're working on that. So it really is a transformational moment in the trucking industry, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of these kinds of all-electric trucks, Janice, on the road. So it's coming. It's coming. We're getting there. Thank you.
Great. Any other comments by board members? Supervisor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Good morning, everyone. I wasn't going to say anything, but since Cesar was mentioned, I thought I should. I appreciate the photo of your wife, Dr. Burke. That's awesome that she was organizing and helping out La Causa way back when, and supporting people who she didn't even know, and just because she felt a sense of social justice. That was important. One of the quotes that I think is very, very important of Cesar's legacy is that he said, once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. We have seen the future, and the future is ours. And that quote really digs deep within me and my soul. And obviously, I think many of us that are here in this dais and many folks that are out here in the public and staff, you know, as a son of immigrant farm workers, my father and my mother working in the fields for many, many, many years. As a matter of fact, that's how they met. They were picking grapes. You know, my father, when he first came from El Distrito Federal, meaning the capital of Mexico, he landed in a little town known as Oasis, California, little farm worker community, and was raised in a trailer park. And my mother, when she came from Tepatitlan, Jalisco, she landed in beautiful Calexico, California, in Imperial County. And so my parents first started picking grapes without knowing each other in Imperial County. And then I think my father met my mother in the Coachella Valley picking grapes. And then my father finally asked for my mother's hand in Arvin, California. See, they were migrant farm workers. They followed the crop, right? And then eventually they found out that they were pregnant with me in Arvin, California, at the same healthcare center that Cesar and the United Farm Workers built on behalf of the farm workers. And obviously, you know, the movement is controversial, and depending on where you sit, if you're a grower or you're a farm worker or even a bystander, you know, some of those efforts might be controversial to you, or you might not totally appreciate why this began. But mind you, you know, in those days, I remember my mom telling me when I was growing up is that they didn't have restrooms at one time. No access to clean drinking water, and definitely no rest breaks, and obviously they weren't earning very much. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the United Farm Worker Movement, although it was being organized through the National Farm Worker Organization and Cesar and Dolores Huerta and many others, and Delano, California, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention to folks that the actual first grape strike was in Coachella, California, my backyard, and it was actually under the leadership of the Filipino community, like Larry Itliong. And I think it's important that we recognize the fact that folks in Coachella, that history is lost, but that's why I think we need to continue to express it. And as well, with the Filipino movement, a 10-day strike, they were earning $1.10 an hour. and they decided to strike because they wanted 15 cents more. That's all they wanted, was just 15 cents more. Because they wanted to make the same amount as the farm workers that were working under the Bracero program. If you remember that. And that was a result of the lack of workers during World War II in the fields. And so many folks from Mexico, Latin America, specifically Mexico, were brought here as braceros, meaning arms, braceros, brazo, to work in the fields. And so, yeah, they went from $1.10 to $1.25 because they actually won that victory. They won that struggle. 10-day strike in Coachella, and as a result of that, that's when the Filipino Movement Agriculture Worker Organizing Committee came together with the NFWA, National Farm Worker Association, that's the leadership of Cesar and Dolores, came together. The Filipino Movement went to, like Larry Leong, went to Delano, and they came together, and they did a 5-year strike at that time. But I think it's just important that we recognize the fact that Cesar and Dolores obviously are pillars in the social justice movement for farm workers, but so were the Filipino movement. And we can't forget about them as well. And as well, just recognize the fact my little hometown, known as Coachella, California, played a role as well. And quite frankly, as the quote says, one of the dreams and visions of Cesar was that one day the sons and daughters of farm workers will go on a higher education and come back to the communities to serve. And I'd just like to say to Cesar and obviously his family, like Paul Chavez and others, his vision is coming true one day at a time. And it's boards like these that allow that to happen. And obviously, those of us that are here that are able to serve, we serve for a reason, to serve for a purpose. We need to ask ourselves every single day, why do we serve? And I think that's why Cesar existed, in my opinion. He's a godsend. He helped many people without even knowing who they might have been. But he really pushed us all to think about, why are we here? What's our purpose? And so with that said, I just want to make sure I mentioned a little bit of history about Cesar. In 1993, when he passed away, I was a junior at UC Riverside. I was actually taking in books. I was at the library. I worked at the library. And I remember when we first heard when he passed, it devastated all of us. I had to go home that day because it was painful. So I'd like to thank AQMD for what you did. My staff attended. I could not attend. And for having that celebration in his honor and in the honor of farm workers. Thank you so much.
It's interesting, and, you know, that's the most I've ever heard you talk since I've known you. You know, that's amazing, man. But when you brought that up, see, most people don't realize that when Filipinos came to America, they were classified as blacks. Why was that? You know, all that's lost in history now.
Mm-hmm.
But they were classified and treated as black citizens. So, you know,
Mr. Chairman? may I-
yes.
You know, when Senator Perez was saying,
Thank you, buddy.
I told a story, and I think it's worth repeating. It only takes 30 seconds or so. I gave Cesar Chavez free radio time on my radio station that was in Lemoore, California.
Mm.
He drove up with two other people, and a tourist said he was one of those individuals that told me the other day, got out of the car and walked up to me. 1969, for an African-American person, he walked up and he says, someone told me, because I was the only African-American person around, this was in Lemoore, California, that you owned this station. And I said, yes. He told me what he was going to do, and I was just a young lad at that one time, what he was about and what he was, and I says, station is yours, whatever you want to do. And he advertised for the farm workers and for the causes that he was going to do, and he never paid a dime, and we never charged him a dime for what we did for them. So I was glad to be able to assist him in this endeavor.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to say that Clark Parker got some free passes on a cruise ship from that radio station and took me down to the Bahamas So, yeah, that was like 40 years ago. So, yeah, I love that station. Yes,
Mr. Chairman, I just want to mention, after hearing Supervisor Perez talk, I think we shouldn't forget the great work of Dolores Huerta. And I heard her speak a couple of years ago. She's a dynamic speaker, very involved in the farm worker movement here in California, and a really outstanding individual. And give a shout out for the women out there that are working for labor and working for women. So
we'd like to invite all board members to the celebration next year. Moving along with the agenda, Dwayne, do you have any comments?
No, sir.
Okay, then we'll go items 1 through 15. Anybody who has to abstain? Consent calendar, items 1 through 15.
I'd like to pull number 5, Mr. Chair. Caciotti just pulled, just a simple
Pull
question.
number 5. Mr. Benoit?
Yes, I just need to read into the record that I do not have a financial interest, but I am on the RCTC Commission. So item number 8 involves the RCTC Commission, and I just want to point that out. Thank you.
Supervisor Bartlett?
Sorry, I'd like to pull item 2, please.
Supervisor 2? Okay. Supervisor Perez?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just for agenda item number 8,
Okay.
as well as our colleague here, Mr. Benoit, I do not have a financial interest, but I am required to identify for the record that I am a commissioner of the Riverside County Transportation Commission, which is involved in this item. That's item number 8.
Okay. Isn't there an item that I need to,
No, sir, that's noted on page, right above the closed session agenda. If there are items where they're entered into under the authority of the executive officer.
Can I vote on all the items?
You can, sir.
Yes. Okay,
That's not
great.
an item that's being voted on by the board.
Great. Okay. Supervisor Hahn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For agenda item number 8, I do not have a financial interest, but am required to identify for the record that I serve on the Board of Directors for the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which is involved in this item.
Okay, I'll accept a motion on 1 through 15 with the exception of 2
Mr.
and
Chair?
5.
You have speakers on a number of items?
We do have,
Harvey is on 2A through item 11, and then Ms.
and
Rita
we
Leaf
have
on 2B.
Rita Loof on 2B.
Yes.
Oh, well, 2's already pulled, so, he's on 11 also?
Did you say 2 through 11 or 2 and 11?
2 through 11, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 11.
Missed you last month, Harvey. Glad you came back. Okay,
3 minutes total, sir.
3
for-
minutes.
For
total.
items 1 through 23, sir.
1 through 23, okay. So, I don't know how to handle this. This one's a new one on me. 27 years, this one is totally new. Since he is signed up on everything 2 and beyond, should we we let him come up and speak first?
That would be my recommendation, sir.
Yes, okay. Harvey? Mr. Etter? Sorry. Glad to see you back.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Harvey Etter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition in reference to all these different items. The overview is that we need immediate total solar conversion ASAP. I want to incorporate into the record a book that came out a month or two ago called The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace Wells. It basically says that in reference to climate change, that the scientific numbers are things are getting worse, and the rate of change is quicker than we thought. One thing I want to point out is that they said in the last 30 years, burning fossil fuels, we've burned more than we have in all previous human history. That really hits me right in the gut. I mean, basically, we've done last 30 years, we've done nothing. Some stuff in the last 10, 5. And that we're in, again, the sixth great extinction in the history of the planet in the last 450 million years. And this is like extinctions of, 80, 90% of all species on the Earth. And again, in 2017, there was a conference on this with the Vatican. There's been books on it and whatnot. We've got to take action and quick. And there is the Solar New Deal, which we proposed in the 16 plan. And we're trying to get the records of everything from the 16 plan and information requests, records requests. So I don't know if there's some problems there. I also want to incorporate into the record the February 8th meeting of the administrative committee to the board, 51 minutes, and about a quarter of it is me and Dr. Burke and some of Wayne talking about the Supreme Court case unanimous decision, best available retrofit control technology for 12 districts case with the coating manufacturers, unanimous decision that BARCT is technology forcing, and in reference to solar, it's law and has not been implemented. Basically in there, anyway, running out of time. I want to do a call out to my nephew, Marley Etter, who is named after Bob Marley, that he's a graduate student in the flute at USC, and it was the first American to ever make it into the finalists in the international flute competition in Copenhagen, Denmark last week. And it shows that these are some working rather than just buying out places in our intellectual university system.
Thank you very much, Mr. Etter, for your testimony. We have Ms. Loof on 2A. I saw you there, and I lost you for a minute.
Good
How are you
morning.
this morning?
Fine, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, board members. I'm actually on 2B. Would you like me to testify now or hold off until you call the item?
I'm sorry.
I'm on item 2B. You called for 2A.
No, I called you for 2B.
Okay, thank you.
I'm taking both 2A and 2B and getting it out of the way.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Rita Loof, Director of Environmental Affairs for RADTEC International. And RADTEC is a nonprofit organization for the UV and EB LED industry. We have over 800 members nationwide. I'd like to start out by stating a few basic facts. According to the district, if 100% of stationary sources were to shut down, we would still not achieve clean air. NOx on mobile sources, not VOCs on stationary sources, are the main problem. And incentives are the way forward to achieve emission reductions. According to the staff report, there are no emission reductions whatsoever with this Rule 1106 proposal. And not surprisingly, no additional reformulations to lower VOC materials is expected. To give you some perspective, our materials are typically less than 50 grams per liter, and Rule 1106 allows for 730 grams per liter in some categories. We're talking about materials that are fractions of a human hair, and therefore we have a very hard time measuring those very low VOC contents. In 2015, this rule came before the board and it was voted down 8-2. I don't want to seem ungrateful to the staff. I think Ms. Reese has done a fine job trying to work with our industry on getting a compromise on the test method. But once again, we're dealing with the lack of clarity with test methods for thin film materials. The current methods specified in 1106 are not valid for energy curable materials, according to findings by both the Environmental Protection Agency and the district. And the district has yet to specify which method they would use for compliance verification. So we think an inspector looking at this rule would be very confused. We have the ASTM method that we have developed in the definition section and now in the exemption section. But the test methods listed in the test method section do not apply to energy curable materials. And therefore, we are still left in limbo as to which method would be used for compliance purposes. So we have grave concerns with that. And we are left once again asking the question, if not our method, then what? What does a facility do when an inspector shows up at the facility asking for compliance verification? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. This concludes the testimony on items 1 through 15. So we can take a motion now on all items.
Except the ones that have been pulled, right? I
Yes,
pulled number
2 and 5.
I'll move the balance.
Second.
Any opposition? Hearing none, those items are carried. Item number 2.
Supervisor.
Right. Thank you, Chair. I had pulled item number 2. I know that with regard to the increase in fees, in particular the toxic emission fees. So question for staff, I know that we currently are collecting about $500,000, and under the new methodology, it would be about $4.5 million, and that would get us more towards cost recovery. What would the amount of full cost recovery be? And this is also a huge increase going from $500,000 to $4.5 million. And then are we planning on, most of the fees are increasing by about 3.5%, which is equivalent to the CPI. But are we also setting in place a cost escalation that would be an automatic so we don't have huge increases in fees from time to time?
So in regard to the toxics fee, you're correct. We are trying to get towards full cost recovery. When we add up all the activities of the district that are eligible to be covered by toxics emission fees, it is higher than the $4.5 million that this will eventually increase revenue by. It comes out to about $20 million. So we're not asking for full cost recovery. We are asking partially for that. And it is true that the toxics emission fees going from $500,000 to approximately $5 million is a big increase. But the total emission fees, when you include criteria pollutants, this represents about a little bit over a 20% increase in total emission fees.
How did we go such a long period of time then where we weren't getting towards a method for cost recovery?
Well, it's due to the new activities around toxics, whether it's rulemaking, AB 617, enhanced enforcement, what we found in Paramount. So we are and continue to anticipate much more activity at the district around these toxic issues.
Okay, all right, thank you. That clarifies things for me. With that, I'll make a motion to move the item.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on item 2. Is there any opposition to that? Hearing none, item 2 is carried. Item 5, Mr. Cacchiotti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions for clarification. This is a great item about AB 617 implementation. And under the item, there's several recommendations. I want to go to recommendation number 6, very interesting. I'll just read it and ask for clarification. It says issue an RFP in an amount not to exceed $900,000 to solicit proposals to develop an environmental chamber for initiating sensor performance verification program and to develop a pilot program for a sensor library for our communities. I thought this was exciting. I was just at a council meeting in Baldwin Park last week. One of the council members who lives right by the 605 and 10 freeway was asking for, every time I go to the council meetings, they want a monitor set up by their city or by the airport to monitor. So we've got our 42 monitors are out there. We've got some next to you on Azusa one side, Pomona the other. Shows no but our residents or, the pollution here. I took the train there, dropped me off right at the city hall. I said, the trains are polluting right now, but we're putting over $75 million in the Metrolink to do it. But this was exciting because you're talking about building a new chamber here at the AQMD. I know our AQ, Sensor Performance Evaluation Center, AQ specs. So if you can describe for me, where would you build this chamber for testing, how big it's going to be, and this library where our communities from all over the 4 counties can go in and say, how can we test the air quality in our areas and things like that? Give us some back. This is really exciting.
So, right, excuse me. So right now, we do have the chamber inside our lab, and it is really the only kind in the nation. And what we want to do is to expand on that, to look at all of the work that's been gone on with recent, I would say, further deployment of low-cost sensors. But Dr. Lowe can certainly address the location within the current lab and some of the other aspects associated with that.
And the size of this, I haven't seen our new chamber there. It's been there a couple of years, but I'm curious the size you're talking about.
Chamber is about...
Oh, there's this, that small?
No, it's much bigger.
That's about...
Councilmember Benoit has about the right size.
That's what I said. It's about 6 by 6.
So thank
well,
you.
Yeah, you want to stand up.
So thank you for your question, Councilmember Cacchiotti. It is an exciting initiative and is something that's bringing empowerment to the communities and engagement to the communities as an educational tool as well as an informational tool for guiding some of the actions that we have as an agency in these communities. As it is under AB 617 item, of course, as this program becomes more developed, it's going to be given priority to the AB 617 communities. However, in general, I believe you're right in terms of this is exciting to provide sensors and opportunities to community members. It's basically input that we've gotten from our work that we've done as part of the EPA STAR grant. We're now in 12 communities, and input from some of those communities has been very positive. So as far as your question with regards to location, so we are looking very carefully because a chamber of that size and magnitude is very heavy. So we have to be careful of some of the structural integrity of the building, especially when we're looking at the laboratory. So we do have our workshops downstairs as well, where we have some space to put a second chamber. And the chamber, just for your reference, is intended to be larger in size than the current AQ spec chamber, which will continue to evaluate incoming sensors and continue that program. And the new chamber will provide a continuous service for that proposed sensor library program.
I haven't been in a chamber yet. I'll probably go by today and look at it, but can a person walk in there? Do you put the sensors in there and you just test them? And so how do you do it? Just very quick.
Yeah, so right now the chamber is designed to test around 3 sensors at a time, so it is not a full walk-in chamber. I think part of the design, I don't think the new one will be a full walk-in chamber, but it will accommodate a lot more sensors. So again, it can kind of provide more of a continuous service for a program that would require that.
I think it said 20 sensors you can test in this new chamber, right?
Yeah, we're going to try to hit more of the 10 to 20 range.
And so if our communities want to start these, purchase a couple low-cost sensors, you're going to test them all, calibrate them, I know it's said in there, before deployment, after deployment, and tell us if they actually work. Do they work properly? Because how many sensors are out in the market now that if our communities or residents want to test, like my council member in Baldwin Park, who I represent, they want to do some testing by the 605 and 10 freeway. All of us may want to do testings in our neighborhood. I don't know. How do we determine, do you have to provide a list? These work, these don't work?
Let me jump into this because I was actually asked this question yesterday in Sacramento, and I want to see if I'm correct. But I've been told we've tested every sensor in the world.
So commercially available.
commercially available.
And also, do we ever, say if some of our communities, I know we've got these large 42 sensors that are set up. Can we do a temporary testing, like for a day or two in a community, provide to our residents if they've got an issue? I know it's very costly, and there's all these, I know right now in Pasadena, we've got the Devil's Gate sediment removal, the supervisor's dealing with, and Catherine. And we've had the community pounding us, and thank God the county's gonna fund that. But how much does it cost if we want to just put up a temporary sensor for a day or a week and test for some of our residents? I'm just curious, Wayne. Because I got to respond to this council member soon.
Well, a lot depends on the type of sensor that we're putting in and, you know, the challenge that we have with the low-cost sensors. And I'll let Dr. Lowe go much more into the detail is, you know, how long they last, under what conditions. The calibration is key. The atmospheric conditions, humidity plays a big role on some of these. So I think it just depends on the type of equipment. I know we've offered to provide technical support with regards to the Devil's Gate project, both through a review of the existing data as well as our enforcement team. So we would use a number of different tools, but as to some of the specifics, maybe Dr. Lowe can add to that.
Sure. So to answer the question in terms of cost, a lot of it is going to be in staff time and resources, especially if staff is the one deploying, which is why, you know, cooperatively working with communities in a partnership where if we can provide sensors and the training on how to operate them and site them, would be a very good partnership to kind of extend that reach and be able to assist with reducing the cost of a deployment. And that's why I think a program like this will be of assistance, because if a community can come in with a defined issue, number one, we can provide some assistance to indicate whether sensors are appropriate for their particular concern, and then be able to issue out sensors that we are confident that would meet performance criteria for that particular project. And they can come back and probably we would give advice on some of the data interpretation, and we provide that as part of the training as well.
You know,
And I want
oh,
to, excuse me, Councilman, I just want to add a point that these low-cost sensors, these are not regulatory sensors. That means we don't necessarily take enforcement action based on those sensors. And so it's a very important point, because oftentimes we're presented with data from various sources of information. We can use that information to deploy other type of instruments, and it'll give us an idea of what's out there. But based on that data alone, we may not be able to use that for enforcement action. So I just want to be clear that there's a wide range of tools that are out there. Some of it can be used for enforcement, some of it can't. So with these low-cost sensors, they're not enforcement tools.
For example, council discussion the other night, I talked about the traffic volumes, or hundreds of thousands of vehicles, and your hydrocarbons, nitric oxide, carbon monoxide. What would you recommend? Were people near freeways, different types of sensor equipment versus people near manufacturing, things like, is that what you would recommend?
Sure. So when you have such a complex mixture, sensor technology alone would not be, I think, sufficient to identify that kind of complex mixture that you're looking at, especially when near freeways and other areas of heavy congestion. You may have other sources that may be impacting the area, and that's where you need a little bit more sophisticated tools. You may need laboratory analysis for samples. You may need a lot of tie-in to meteorology, as well as knowledge about what the nearby sources are to run in a computer model, a lot of what our planning group does for the AQMP and local air toxics. So it becomes a lot more complicated when you have many sources in an area, and you have to look to other tools in addition to measurements to be able to find out a little bit more information about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great job.
Thank you.
I'll move the item unless there's any other.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on item 5. Is there any opposition to item 5? Hearing none, item 5 is carried. I will now accept a motion on items 17 through 23.
Move approval. Second.
Is there any opposition to items 17 through 23?
I'd like to talk about item 18, please.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to talk about item 18, please.
8?
18.
Okay.
18.
18. Got it. Why don't you do that now?
Sure. So this is the Legislative Committee report, and it talks about SB 732, the agency's effort to create a taxing district in the South Coast region to allow a tax ultimately to be placed on the ballot. As the language has come forth that I've read about, hasn't been presented in Legislative Committee, but the language doesn't include a taxpayer oversight component. And I understand that the language of the bill simply creates the district and other taxing measures will come about later. But I would like to see that protection for taxpayers offered in the bill, requiring that any tax created in the district include a taxpayer oversight committee. This is fairly standard with school bonds, transportation measures that come through before county transportation commissions, and it seems like a basic element that we should have in the authorizing legislation rather than having to get it in every individual tax member item that might ever come before the body. So I'd like to see if I could get my colleagues to agree on that and direct staff to work with the author to include that component in the bill, please.
I'll refer that back to the Ledge Committee, and they can ruminate on it and decide what they'd like to do with that request.
Yeah, we would be happy to work with you, Supervisor, on, if you have an example of some specific language, I think that'd be really helpful. We can certainly look for it, but I just thought if you had some language, we could look at that.
I'm sure we can find it.
And we can certainly go back to committee and discuss that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would you like to move that item now? No? No, okay.
I'll move the item.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to the item? No opposition? Hearing none, that item is carried.
So you have a motion now for items.
So now we have the motion on the balance.
I'll move the item.
Second?
I already moved the item, I think so.
And the opposition, hearing none, the balance is carried. Item 24.
Good morning, Chairman
We may
Burke
have passed that twice.
and governing board members. My name is Mike Morris. I'm Planning and Rules Manager. I'll be providing a brief presentation on proposed amendment Rule 1134. Rule 1134 is a command and control regulation as we're sunsetting the reclaim program. It regulates stationary gas turbines, which, as depicted on this slide, are essentially jet engines that are used to generate electricity, occasionally generate steam. They're on a much smaller scale than the electricity generating facilities that we had in Rule 1135. Most of the units that are stationary gas turbines right now are not currently subject to Rule 1134. Most of them are in the reclaim program, or they were installed after 1989. With the proposed amendments to the rule, that will change. We will include all units that were installed after 1989. The proposed rule also includes NOx and ammonia limits based on our BARCT assessment. The proposed rule will realize, upon full implementation, 2.8 tons of NOx emission reductions per day. The cost effectiveness for this regulation is at less than $12,000 per ton of NOx reduced. There are some provisions incorporated into the regulation for near limit turbines. Those are combined cycle turbines that are currently at 2.5 parts per million. The rule limit is 2.0. It's not cost effective in terms of it's greater than $50,000 per ton of NOx reduced for those pieces of equipment. Similarly, for low use units that operate less than 10% of their capacity, it's also not cost effective at this time for them to meet the proposed limits. In determining the proposed limits, we went through a BARCT assessment process. Basically, we looked at the technology, the equipment that exists today, both within the district and outside of the district. We looked at the regulations, both within the district and outside of the district. The technology that's available, we shared this through our working group committees, provided the references, links to the information that we're using, allowed the working group committee to participate fully, to provide feedback and input, and to review our work. With that, we did a cost effectiveness for all the pieces of equipment and came up with our final BARCT emission limits. Those emission limits are depicted here on this table. Most of the equipment fall into the first two categories, the combined cycle and simple cycle turbines. The remainder are just a handful of units in different types of applications. These limits will come into effect on January 1st, 2024, with the exception of some compressor gas turbines, which we provide some additional time for extenuating circumstances. There have been some key issues that have been brought up by the Western States Petroleum Association and the Regulatory Flexibility Group. These are comments that you probably have heard before through other BARCT landing rules. The first comment that we'd like to address is with respect to the authority to require replacement as part of the BARCT process. Staff believes that we do have that authority and that the statute allows for a broad interpretation and that the BARCT process does not limit our authority. A second comment that was brought up was that the NOx standards that we're providing don't adequately consider other pollutants. We do include ammonia limits to address particulate matter, and there is a discussion of the particulate matter in the staff report as well. A third comment is that we haven't been providing the information that we're using to make the BARCT determinations. As I mentioned, during the BARCT process, we do hold working groups and share that information, allow review and facilities to provide their input. Fourth comment is that the new source review process should be addressed comprehensively and expeditiously prior to facilities exiting reclaim. Rule 2002 allows facilities to remain in reclaim, and that we continue to work with our stakeholders and US EPA on resolving these NSR issues. The last comment is that the CEQA and socioeconomic impacts are piecemealed, and the socioeconomic and CEQA analysis was done through our 2016 Air Quality Management Plan. We do have a CEQA document and a socioeconomic document associated with the changes specifically for this regulation, which is quite a common practice, as you've noticed through all of our rulemaking. We generally, where there's an emission reduction or cost, include a CEQA and socioeconomic report. With that, staff is recommending that you adopt the resolution certifying the subsequent environmental assessment and amend Rule 1134. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We have some testimony on this item. Ms. Priscilla Hamilton, if you come to one open microphone, and Mr. Adder, if you would come to the other vacant microphone.
Hi, my name is Priscilla Hamilton, and good morning, Chairman Burke and members of the board. I'm an environmental affairs manager with SoCalGas. SoCalGas envisions being the cleanest natural gas utility in North America. We are part of the solution in advancing AQMD's clean air goals, and we are taking bold steps to green our operations. In fact, we have made a commitment to have 20% renewable natural gas flowing through our system by 2030. SoCalGas is also a public utility with unique challenges and obligations to serve our customers, over a third of whom receive financial assistance. I'm here today to say that SoCalGas is in support of Rule 1134, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with staff to address our concerns. As staff knows, we have reduced over 90% of NOx emissions associated with turbine compressors by removing 3 units from service in 2018. We are committed to replacing the 4 remaining compressor turbines at our Moreno facility. We have raised concerns with staff about being able to meet the ammonia limit in the rule, and we appreciate the time to demonstrate this limit. We also thank staff for recognizing our unique operational needs and a new class and category, and for allowing ample time to replace our turbines. Rule 1134 is the first of several reclaim rules that will impact SoCalGas, and we will continue to work with staff to find approaches that are cost-effective and feasible. We are committed to reducing emissions at our facilities while maintaining affordable and reliable service for our millions of customers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Eder?
Hello, good morning. My name's Harvey Eder. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. Natural gas, methane. When I spoke a few minutes ago, I said that we're in the sixth great extinction in the history of the planet. And the last 450 million years, and these are caused by carbon and methane, okay? This has happened, half a dozen times in the history of the planet. It was cited in this book, and I talked to Dr. Katzenstein, who's now head of the lab, and his specialty was in methane, natural gas, right? And I asked him if he knew this was a fact, and he kind of said, no. I was surprised. Anyway, I haven't talked to him recently, but it's against state policy to import natural gas into the state. There's all kinds of problems with this renewable natural gas from waste systems. Feedlots are not looking at drug-resistant antibiotics are being distributed through the natural gas system. And there's a body count that didn't have to be reported until last year of premature deaths and whatnot, valued at $9 million per. Reclaim, and this was referred to in what I put in the record, or one of my other comments from the February 8th meeting, that we brought this out, that reclaim is technology forcing. There's a Supreme Court decision, it has to be used. It was questioned whether, Wayne and staff questioned whether solar could be used for refineries and stuff. And they just made a statement, and I said, well, you need sites. I said, the 40 exhibits we put in the 16 plan, which we've been waiting and haven't gotten it from staff. And that might fit a pattern because we've had disagreements in the open about whether getting credit for solar just for stationary sources or for mobile, and reducing the big numbers, and that's what we're doing and proposing and needs to be done. And we've run into the wall here. We got the wind at our back, the wall in our face. In the old days, used to say up against the wall, MF, and used to say, well, it's better be off it than up against it. This is not off the wall. This is the real world. This is the real situation today. And we've got to deal with, and we can't let these things continue. We've got to change, and we've got to change now, and thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. That concludes the testimony on this item. I have no speakers from the board. We have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Would the clerk open the
No,
roll?
there's a
Sorry,
supervisor.
I do have a question and a comment.
Okay.
Wondered how many reclaim participants are ready to exit the program with the adoption of this rule?
We don't have the exact number, but most of the participants are electing to stay in the program as we allow them to do until these NSR issues get worked out. So we don't expect a mass exodus based on this rule. We'd have to look and see how many of those facilities have equipment that is covered by landing rules in addition to the ones that have been adopted versus the ones that we're planning to adopt.
Just strikes me again, our rush to get out of reclaim, our insistence on command and control and saying that the market-based reclaim program didn't work, and yet contrast that with what we heard, I think, the last meeting about, as we look at how we're going to do indirect source rules, it's creating a market-based trading program. The irony is rich.
Any other comments by any other? So we have a motion and a second on this item. Would the clerk open the roll? Rule passes 9-3. Okay, that concludes our calendar. We'll move to public we have closed session, correct?
No, we do not today, sir.
Okay, then we will take public comment and adjourn. Can we get our list of public comment speakers up? Jan Victor Anderson and Harvey Etter. Come to the vacant microphones.
Cool. Do I just start? Cool beans. Good afternoon, board. Hello, my name is Jan Victor Anderson, a 20-plus year resident of the South Coast Air Basin. I grew up in West Long Beach, right next to the now Endeavor Marathon facility, and currently live in Carson, where there are many refineries. I work as an organizer with East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice in West Long Beach, and a few of our members are here today because of the refinery fire that occurred about 3 weeks ago. I'm disappointed that post the fire that happened 3 weeks, I'm pretty sure when we looked at the agenda multiple times, we are not discussing it as a board, especially since that refinery is a stationary facility, which this board is to oversee. It's disappointing that we're not taking action to be preemptive so that resident life in Carson, Wilmington, and West Long Beach, and any refinery community is protected should there be a disaster. That same weekend was the fire of the 8 storage tanks in Texas. Living next to refinery infrastructure is dangerous. The job of this board is to monitor air quality, oversee stationary sources like refineries, regulate them, and enforce the regulations that y'all create so that we can protect the quality of life for many of the millions of residents in the South Coast Air Basin. We need you to enforce the policies that you have to make sure that we are safe living next to these facilities. We need you to take action and that there should be consequences when facilities like refineries over-emit and endanger the lives of residents living next to them. To make sure that residents in the region are also properly informed when an incident like a fire, an explosion, or anything happens. I will share that when the refinery fire happened, I was driving from North Long Beach, and I just saw a huge black cloud, and I didn't know what it was. I assumed it was the Tesoro Endeavor Marathon facility, and it turned out it was Phillips 66, and that allegedly there was a shelter in place by the fire department, which I didn't get, and many of the residents that I know in Carson didn't know about. Many residents in West Long Beach were alarmed that there were helicopters flying over their neighborhood, unsure of what was going on, and some people could actually physically see the fire from their homes. It is a shame that this board does not have this fire on the agenda. I will say that again, and that we need y'all to take more action, and that's why we're here. We're asking y'all, yes, air monitoring is great. It's great that AB 617 and all the meetings around air monitoring is happening, but we need better regulations, and when those regulations are made, that they are enforced so that we decrease the emissions that we as residents are exposed to, and we protect the quality of lives, the quality of the life of the folks living right next to refinery infrastructure. We need to better inform residents when a facility has a safety issue like a fire, a major flare, or an explosion, because many people did not know what to do, did not even know that there was a shelter in place, and were probably exposed to the emissions coming from the refinery at that time. And we need consequences when something like that happens. And also that we need y'all to take action, and that means talking about the issue when it comes up. So it should have been on this meeting, but it's not. Is it going to be in a future meeting? Is there going to be education for residents?
Thank you. Stay there, stay there, stay there, stay there, stay there. Did a good job, so.
Oh, yes, I do this. This is my job. This is my life.
Can you tell the board what was done in relationship with that fire?
Yeah, so
Because
we were,
I was like him, I saw it on television. And it looked like an extensive fire.
yeah, it was on a Friday. We were in the office. We also saw it on the television. We contacted our enforcement team. They were already deployed with the fire team. You may recall seeing on the news that the county fire team was actually held in abeyance for a while until the refinery allowed the county fire to move in. That time, we had set up additional perimeter monitoring. We were doing monitoring. We had done a series of sampling. Based on the initial sampling round, we didn't have anything that was above concentrations that were levels of concern. Public Health put out an immediate statement regarding the health effects with regards to the findings. We had also put out a statement as well. I think that the gentleman's comment about we need to do a better job of informing the community. That's one of the things that we're looking at is how can we be better in terms of notifying the community, other than working through incident command and working with the normal process. Maybe there's a distribution that we can get
How come
through
we don't have
emails.
text message?
Well, what we have been doing, Dr. Burke, is using social media to post this kind of information.
Yeah, but you need something direct to the people who live in the
Yeah.
community.
And maybe we can work with like Nixle and some of the other alert notifications.
Or maybe we could work with our app and do focused, notices through our app that we've already got out there, and then encourage people when they have an incident like this to get our app. It's another reason to promote our app and give us a direct way to communicate with people, especially people that are in communities of concern. So I think that would be another way we can maybe work on that.
Yeah, that's an
That's a
excellent
great idea.
suggestion,
That's a
Councilman.
great idea. But, you know, if you can do it for a lost child,
Right.
you should be able to do it, and you should be able to contain it geographically so that it is in the area that is affected.
Yeah, as I
mean,
mentioned,
they do it on school campuses now, you know, when there's a problem, right? Yes. So, you know, that's the kind of, I'm sure that's what, the kind of thing he's talking about, you know, and we got a genius. I'm telling you, we got a guy who is a genius in this department. So, Ron, you need to get on this one, okay?
we'll be on
To
it.
keep your title. You know, somebody else wants your title all the time. There's some 22-year-old kid out there who's doing programming who wants your job. So, no, he is a genius at that, and he'll figure that out. But thank you very much for coming today.
Dr. Burke, can I say something?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think the speaker raised some very critical issues. I know Councilmember Buscaino and I both represent, you know, certainly Wilmington that has long been sort of plagued by refineries, and those living next to refineries live really in constant anxiety about what might happen. So I'm new around here. Why wouldn't it have been appropriate for an incident like that to have been agendized in some way? And would it ever come up on our agenda? Because clearly we've spent this time talking about this, and would it have been appropriate to agendize an incident like that so that the board members could have talked about things like notification to residents, sheltering in place, getting a report on maybe what the impacts were? Just because all those statements were released, public health, or we were monitoring, you know, we didn't really have a chance to digest that information and discuss it. So should that have appeared on an agenda? Or how would it have appeared?
Typically, the board considers the policy aspects. And so a occurrence, unless there was a request for a report out, and even if there were a request for a report out, I would caution that under these kind of scenarios where there is a release at a facility, there's an ongoing investigation. So we can talk about the findings that we have up to that point to a certain extent, but by the same token, we wouldn't want to jeopardize any case that we may have and any enforcement aspects that we're considering. So we could certainly agendize that if there are these kind of incidents, that there's a report out. Typically what we would have done is report it in the weekly report to the board. But I think this issue is somewhat broader because we're talking about public notification. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do right now is to assess how can we improve our public notification process. We just brought on a new director of communications, and she's looking at all of these aspects right now, and we hope to be coming back, she'll be coming back to us with recommendations that we would look then to implement those recommendations.
I mean, I appreciate that, and I wouldn't want to jeopardize any kind of ongoing investigation, but I think it goes a long way as a public entity that the public actually has a sense that we we know it happened, we're discussing it, we're trying to figure out what we could do better in the future, so.
Yeah.
I think that's important for the public that we all serve.
You know, my question in line with the supervisors is, you know, I'm from a small town, so I always think small, okay? So it's difficult for me to understand how you could have a fire at a refinery and tell me that there was no discernible emissions. I mean, what was on fire? You know?
Yeah, it wasn't that the word
And I know
discernible.
you're gonna give me some long, complex, why are you so dumb and still chair answer. But if I was a member of the public, that would be, hey man, all that black smoke, what's in there? If you tell me there's nothing in there.
Yeah, and I never said there was nothing in there.
Oh, okay, because, yeah, that's what I heard.
We said exceeded levels of concern. And so there's, in part, what we have, Dr. Burke, is that we want to make sure that when we do report information, that we're 100% confident in that information. And a lot of times when you're doing the initial data collection, it will give us sort of screening level, it'll give us an idea, and what we need to do is take those samples and do further analysis. And the trouble that we have is that you have the need for information quickly, and then the need for certainty also, but not maybe, can we do it as quick? So when we did the initial screening levels, that's where we said we didn't find anything above levels of concern. But we were very specific in that because we wanted to make sure that we had the detailed analysis just in case. Yeah, and all of this
So
is at the perimeter.
I'm gonna leave it like this because we could talk about it all day. I agree with Supervisor Hahn on this one. You know, it was very difficult for me to see all that black pluming smoke. Now, if you're telling me that we have so many of them that we don't want to burn up all the time here, then we got another set of problems that we need to deal with. But I agree with that gentleman. You know, if number one, this new communications person, she came in on the hot seat, so you know this is the kind. I hope she finds out a way to communicate this to these neighborhoods very quickly. She can work with Ron, but I am not comfortable with someone saying, and I know that we have to be scientific, but I don't know a black cloud it was basically a horrendous crowd. So I'm not comfortable telling a fellow like that, hey man, there was nothing, we couldn't find anything in there that was not harmful right away. Now, if we need more equipment or different equipment, tell us that. But I'm sure you understand that. I don't need to-
I do
I don't need-
understand.
But let me continue with public comment because we have
Thank you.
keeping this lady waiting here forever. I'm sorry. No, go. Speak.
Oh, I mean, yes, I totally agree. Communication is important. You can't tell me a black smoke is, I don't know. I see it every day. I literally drive by the place where the fire happens every day to work. So my 8-minute drive from my house to work is the refineries. And I've definitely recorded flares in that refinery and the black cloud, and I know not just me, like one of our members couldn't come today because he had bronchitis, and he's literally like a mile away from that facility. And so I am alarmed, and it's like, this is our lives. Like, a black smoke might not seem like anything to you if you're looking at it in the news, but when you're looking at it with a flame and then helicopters,
no
you're
question.
alarmed. So
But
that's
I
what I'm
have to get to
struggling
the
with.
other people now.
Huh?
I have to get to the other
Oh,
people
yeah.
now. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming and testifying. Mr. Editor, while you're speaking, we're going to have Whitney come down to the vacant microphone. Mr. Editor?
Okay, hello, I'm Harvey Eder. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. There's several things I wanted to hit on. I'm going to have to go quickly. In reference to this discussion about solar and BARCT and reclaim at the Administrative Committee meeting of the board on February 8th. The exchange there, basically, I was getting support from Dr. Burke, and he said he hadn't heard anybody come out and challenge this stuff directly. And then Wayne popped up and said, Mr. Eder's wrong. And then Dr. Burke said, well, there you go talk to Wayne. I said, wait a second, he hasn't cited anything. We've got the 16 plan, 40 exhibits on the Solar New Deal, which we're trying to get now. And then Dr. Burke said, okay, well, you talk to me, but I want 1 page on this, and I don't want 800 pages. I'm not gonna go over 800 pages. So I'm trying to get that information and work that stuff out. And also get it back to Bernie and to AOC so they can build on exactly what has been gone, and I hear there's stuff to do it in the state here. Okay, now, and natural gas plants, the Form 500G, which we filled out like starting in 12, saying that we should be doing solar instead of these gas plants. City of LA now, 3 gas plants, including Scattergood, which we cited, says they're gonna do solar, okay? Everything, all gas plants in the district and the state now have to be reevaluated in reference to this, and we want to jump in that and understand the process. One person was fired. I want to make sure there's no conflict of interest anyway. So that's one thing that's very important. Now, there was a staff here that used to be a person head of modeling and said that your district's required to have a plan under state law every 3 years. That's this year, okay? Now, these 16, 17 plans, all 3 of them have to be solar conversion plans with environmental justice, social equity, vis-a-vis the low-income solar energy project, which we do with the PUC and which was ignored by staff at the district here and has to be brought up, okay? Yesterday, I was at a meeting of the 5th largest electric utility in the state, and Supervisor Kuehl was head of it. There was process, executive recommended comments. I wanted to respond. I wasn't allowed to respond. There's an example of staff keeping the public, and especially some public that know some things, from the decision makers at the board. And she said, we do all kinds of things, so this has to be reviewed here and other entities, and it's a general bad thing for our culture and democracy. Let's see, there are several other things here. History of the district. The gas companies wiped out the solar industry here 100 years ago. It's happening again now. They're trying to do it. In 1910, 30% of building permits in the city of Pasadena had solar hot water in it. They went and extended their lines and put in gas water heaters for free. This is history, all right? We can't let it happen again. It's outrageous what's going on. Questions?
That's an interesting comment.
Yeah.
Mr. Nasser, on those water heaters.
Yeah.
You know, I'm for solar water heaters. Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Etter.
Hello, my name is Whitney Amaya. I'm a resident of West Long Beach and a member of Eastern Communities for Environmental Justice. So as Jan mentioned, and as everyone in the room is aware, 3 weeks ago there was a fire at the Phillips 66 refinery in Carson, which took a little over 2 hours to put out. To this day, it's not completely clear to the community why the fire started and how Phillips 66 will be held accountable, because incidents like that should never happen. There were reports that there were no air quality concerns, but that is really, really, really hard to believe. And I think that right now, yes, there does need to be a better notification system for the community, but also how is AQMD continuously engaging with news media to either update that information, because a lot of the information that I'm getting, I rely on the news media that does go out and report the incident. So right now, there's a huge effort to, with AB 617, to come up with an air monitoring plan and emissions reduction plan, but what is AQMD doing currently to enforce existing regulations? What is AQMD doing currently to hold these refineries accountable? 2.5 years ago, there was a sulfur tank explosion at then Tesoro, now Marathon Refinery, and to this day, I have no idea how they were held accountable. All I remember from that day was a huge plume of yellow smoke, and I did make the call to report it, and there was some follow-up, but I'm not sure of what the consequences were. So I would, if there is something that, like any updates in regards to that I can get right now, I would greatly appreciate it. But also just making the point that we don't just need more air monitoring to tell us what we already know. We also need AQMD to enforce and tighten regulations so that polluting facilities such as Tesoro, which is now Marathon, and Phillips 66 do not continue to harm the health of residents. And as Jan mentioned out, like we live next to these refineries, and so when incidents like this happen, it's really, really scary. To me, my mind jumps to, this is a refinery, this is oil, this is very, what's gonna happen next is, it starts with a fire, but what if there's an explosion? And so what's gonna happen? So I would really appreciate a better, not only notification system, but that these polluting facilities are actually being held accountable for the damage that they're doing. Thank you.
We gotta have somebody speak to her after the meeting.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Ms. Coleman will speak with her, and she's our Deputy Executive Officer for Enforcement and Compliance. So if we could speak with you about that, we can give you an update to a certain extent on the sulfur incident, and then we can also explain our normal process.
Okay, thank you.
And our soon-to-be revised process.
And while Mrs. Mitchell is speaking with Mrs. Marlene Sanchez, please come to the vacant microphone. Thank you.
I just wanted to say
Good morning,
that,
everyone.
No.
You want her to go ahead?
She's
I'm
up to
sorry, I
bat
didn't
first,
hear anybody
then you're
speaking.
up.
I just wanted to say that the fact that we have here this morning a number of persons from the community where they experienced a fire is maybe establishes that we should be taking another look at this. I know we do investigations, but where we have an extraordinary event like this, it's a fire or an explosion or something that is particularly eventful for the community, I think it would be a good idea to put it on our agenda, to allow that community to come forward and speak to us about the event so that we on the board are fully informed. And while we are policymakers, as we saw this morning, a policy has evolved out of this discussion that we need to take a look at. And it isn't that this would be terribly burdensome, because it doesn't happen so often that we have an extraordinary event. But I think that when we do have that sort of thing, that it would be a good idea to put it on our agenda. And then what we're hearing from the community is, we don't know what happened after that, because we undertake an investigation, and that would take time to resolve. But I think by having them come forward, and then we know who they are, we can notify them as developments occur in the investigation, as conclusions are reached, so that they understand what happened as a result of our investigation into the event. That's what I would suggest.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being so patient.
Yeah. My name is Marlene Sanchez, and I live in a community on west side of Long Beach. borderline of Carson and Long Beach. And this morning I was wondering on the way here, why do I have to be in the car for a whole hour to attend one of these meetings? Maybe you should be considering having meetings in our neighborhoods right next to the refineries, because these things happen all the time. That morning, my neighborhood there's like at least 100 houses, not just 1, 2, or 3 houses that were affected, and no one received any notices about anything. We're just wondering. I didn't know when I saw the smoke. I didn't know if the next thing is going to be an explosion. I didn't know if I should just grab my dog and drive off until someone there said, no, it's just a fire. Well, I was still very scared, and I was wondering why no notification. If this had happened in a community that is not, we are a community of people of color, I think the reaction would have been very different if it had been where the socioeconomic conditions are different. I think you owe us respect. Even if we are people of color, we are educated. I'm a teacher, a retired teacher. We deserve to be heard. We deserve consideration. Constantly those fumes, those little smokestacks going up in the air, they're very unsettling. I have to go away from my neighborhood, my actual neighborhood, to go walking every day because I don't know what I'm breathing. And for that man to say that the things were just let out that day, it wasn't let out. It was a fire. There's a big difference. If I started a fire in my backyard, I'm sure the neighbors would call the police and I would suffer some consequences. I want to know what happens to the refinery. Something like that happens, there should be some kind of consequence, and I don't buy this, that there was nothing harmful in, you don't live there. If you live there, you would think differently. And so this is my main concern. That's why I'm here. I was going to go to Lake Elsinore today to see the flowers, but this is more important for me. Thank you.
The flowers are beautiful, but this is more important.
This is more important.
No question about
Yes.
it. No question about it. That concludes our public testimony. We have Mr. Nastri who would like to speak.
Thank you, Dr. Berg. I just want to perhaps review that when there is an incident of this type, we integrate with the responders, the first responders. So we integrate with the fire department, with the police department, and we work through the incident command system, and that includes joint communications. So while I can appreciate people saying that we need to get information out more quickly, we do need to do that, but we also need to work through the incident command system with those local responders. Now, we can do a better job and perhaps use some of our mobile platforms and get better information out there. And we can do it more quickly, but we do have to work through the incident command. I don't want people to think that we can just go independently outside of that. The other aspect that I just want to...
What do you mean we have to work?
So whenever there's an incident, we work with the first responders. That would be the fire department.
Right.
And the way that the structure works is everybody shares...
Who mandates that?
I don't know if there is a mandate. It's the process
Well, you
that
said
everybody utilizes.
We have to work through with the first response. Look, all I'm saying is there are methods by which we can notify people. This is technologically that we're not using.
And we will take advantage, and we will do that. We will fix
Well,
that.
But we weren't talking about it before these people came. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and we'll fix it, and in
I
response...
know you will. I have total confidence in you and Ron. But to say you have to work through the fire department, that's crazy. If there is a toxic air situation, you don't call the fire captain and ask him, can you send out information to the public?
Well, we would notify them. We would actually
That's
do
fine.
both.
You can notify
Right.
them all you want to,
Right.
but be notifying the people who are affected at the same time.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying.
Yes. And I
Okay.
just wanted to add that we can report back, and I would suggest through the stationary committee, on these kind of incidents, and then we can put it on the agenda for the
And
governing board.
Councilmember Robinson wants me to slow my roll, so.
Maybe just a little bit. So, first of all, I have about 100 employees that are within about 2 miles of this particular facility. Okay, and I have family members, including a brother who was on site. So, you know, I'm at that facility frequently, so I share the same concerns. But, you know, we need to be prudent in how we respond to these things. So, is there a mandate to work with incident control? Absolutely not. But if there isn't a consistent message that's coming from the fire department and the air district and public health at the county, then we're going to cause more confusion in the community. That's why you have to go through incident command. It's not a requirement, but if we don't do it, then we're going to have lots of different people providing different information, and the community is going to be frustrated with all of us.
But the fire department never relinquishes information on air quality.
What I'm saying, there is a spokesperson at Incident Command who's talking with the media, and they're sharing all of that information, and we need to be a part of that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't.
But I'm not talking about the guy talking to the little PIO there. And by the way, I applied for that job when I was 25. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about the electronic notification that we're sending to people's phones.
I think we're all on the same page that we need to use every platform available to us, social media, the app that Board Member Benoit mentioned. We need to do more and more of it, okay? We need continual improvement, no doubt. But, you know, I don't want us to start kind of going off, I'm going to use the word rogue, you know, because I think that we need to operate within that structure. And the communication's a vital component to all of this. But you mentioned, you know, the fire department doesn't talk about, you know, air quality issues, but they did give a recommendation to shelter in place. And so, you know, if they're saying shelter in place and we're saying, hey, maybe you need to get out of the area, now you've got conflicting comments coming from two different agencies, and they say, who should we be listening to? So it's just that coordination that we need to continue to have. And, you know, there was a comment made about, you know, just the community that it occurred in, and we don't have the same, we would have better communication if it were a different community, maybe one in my particular area. You know, we have warehouse fires in Orange County all the time. They're very close to residents, and they could have the exact same concerns. And we have the same communication challenges. They're trying to get information from social media and from the LA news stations that serve the Orange County community, and sometimes residents are frustrated. They don't have enough communication coming. We all need to get better, but, you know, I don't think that this is just one community that's being disadvantaged here. It's the fact that we've got 17 million people in a media market here, and it's a real challenge to try to reach them. And whether it's a refinery fire or whether it's a warehouse fire in Anaheim right next to some houses, you're going to have the exact same concerns. No question about it. And each one of those groups could come here wanting a hearing, and we could spend hours and hours and hours. Once we start with one, we're going to just keep going. So, I mean, if we're going to go down that path, we're going to start talking about this from a policy perspective. Maybe we need to look at, we have another board meeting during the month, and we talk just about issues like this, and we just spend however long it takes. So, and I know that this is just one issue right now, but I think that it's a slippery slope that we could go down. So, sorry to slow your roll there.
Oh, no, it's okay. You know, because that's how we get to the middle of the road and get stuff done that needs to be done. Councilmember Caccione.
And Mr. Chair, just so I've given Wayne some maybe assistance. I'm looking at the in your area. Remember the Malibu fires? You talked about incident command, and let's say there is another refinery fire this afternoon. What is the role we want Wayne, and pursuant to the public comment or discussion, what role are we going to play today? Let's say there's one in a couple hours, and so we don't, like you say, there's not 5 different messages coming out, and we're trying to coordinate our messages. So I'm just curious, what would Wayne's responsibility be in this situation?
Let's just say something did happen. The first thing that I do is I check with our compliance and enforcement team. Are we aware of it? And let's just say it's a refinery. We have a team in Long Beach That team usually already deploys inspectors. We will work with the first responders, with the refinery. We will usually integrate into that team. We would typically look at some of the air monitoring. We would make the determination what are the appropriate resources to bring to bear. If we need to send additional resources, we would do that. We would work, though, based on the information that we provide through the incident command, or whether it's a larger incident through unified command, but we always would coordinate. As far as the individual messaging, that's one where there's close coordination between our communications department, our monitoring team, and myself and our senior team. And what we do is we look at how is that information being deployed. There are a number of different tools that we use. Our website is one of them. If we have to put out the communication, typically would go through either the incident or the unified command. But we're talking about how can we be more effective in that distribution. I think that's something that we can look at, but we want to look at it in the context of coordination with others, because we do have to have that coordinated message so that there aren't the conflicting aspects. I think that we can improve on our distribution of that information, whether it's through the app, whether it's through our website posting, or whether it's through outreach to parties that have signed up for those specific kind of notices in that area. There are things that we can do, and from my perspective, like I said, if there's a significant incident, we send out an email to the board as soon as we can where we have that information to keep you all apprised. If it's not a significant in terms of it's on TV, it's a big fire, but let's just say it's a flare issue, as you all know, that's included in the weekly report. There are a number of flare incidences.
See, they're slowing his roll, Dwight.
Yeah. But with regards to that information flow, we do try to look at how we can make sure that you are apprised, but I think we need to also make sure that we do a better job of the public. So understanding their sources of information. Our biggest source from our perspective would be working through the media and having the media distribute that. So that would be, again, through incident command, through television, and that's part of what we're trying to build up, is we don't have that. Well, we have one public information officer, but unfortunately he's going to be leaving it to Caltrans, and we're looking at bringing in more people right now to augment our communications response. But that's typically what would happen and how we would get information out.
I think the answer lies somewhere between Dwight and myself's role here. I think that, you know, electronic thing is the, but you got to operate, no question. You're a former military guy, you know, I understand how the command structure has got to work. But I also know that about 20 years ago, I lived in a different house. I lived up the hill, and I lived on the top of Santa Monica Mountains, and the fire came through there, and I looked out my kitchen window, and the whole Santa Monica Mountains was on fire. It was headed towards my house. I didn't know what to do. Yvonne was running for Attorney General that year. She was out somewhere campaigning. And it is a, man, I was in the military. I wasn't. Of course, they trained me not to be afraid in the military. So I had no training to know what I should do with that fire coming at me like that. You definitely need information, and as quickly as possible. So, Buscaino, Councilman Buscaino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and I appreciate the this dialogue and this discussion. I'd prefer to have this an agendized item, and potentially, Mr. Chair, with your leadership, we can ask the admin committee next time they meet to put this in specific public safety incident on the agenda. But there is a process that needs to be followed, and oftentimes when a major incident like this occurs, it's after the agenda has been posted. But in my experience with LAPD and responding to a number of significant public safety incidents, there is, as Mr. Robinson indicated, a unified command post. And I specifically recall in responding to these sites and going to the command post that AQMD was one of those agencies to be notified. I don't know what went wrong here, but there's no excuse that, with technology today, that we shouldn't be able to notify the impacted residents in and around this specific refinery. So in my experience, we had a few years ago the pier fire in Wilmington, and I felt it was flawless, where we had a unified command post, emergency management division from the LAPD, as well as, of course, the LA Fire, worked hand in hand with AQMD, worked alongside the school districts. Dr. Fine was out there, vocal and visible during a number of press conferences because of the impact of the air quality in response to this pier fire. So that's been my experience. Oftentimes it doesn't happen that way, but or not oftentimes, sometimes it doesn't happen that way. So I believe in response to the public's concerns, I would ask, with your leadership, Mr. Chair, that we ask the admin committee to agendize and maybe even set policy, Mr. Robinson, in response to Mr. Robertson and Ms. Hahn's concerns to make this a standard practice for this agency. That even if we need to call for an emergency admin committee meeting to put something on the agenda within the post of 72 hours or so?
If it's a special, we could actually do it within a
Sure.
24 hours
Sure.
notice.
That's something that we ought to do in response, and we deserve that. I mean, the residents and the public deserves that, so that would be my recommendation moving forward.
I will personally talk to the admin chair and ask him to do that. So we also have.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say that we've had about 3 public commenters who've addressed this issue, and I think it's appropriate for us to give a corresponding amount of time in responding to it and addressing those issues in response to those questions. Our Assistant Deputy Executive Officer, Terrence Mann, for Compliance and Enforcement, wanted to give us a brief update on an issue, and then I would concur with Councilmember Buscaino that we should probably move on to other issues and agendize this issue.
Okay. Why don't we get that agendized for the admin committee meeting? It's probably a little short to get it for next Friday, but maybe the following admin committee. If you can get it on next Friday, put it on next Friday. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you'll be there. Oh, that's right. Yeah, let's get on for next Friday. Yeah, we have a little self-interest going here on the board.
We can do that, sir.
Okay, good. So you want the staff to give their side of this issue now? Huh? I have no. It's up to the board. If they're good, I'm good. They're good. So why don't we do it? I was trying to get my free lunch anyway.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Burke, members of the board. So for those of you who don't know me, can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Thank you. So my name is Terrence Mann. I'm the ADEO for Compliance and Enforcement, and I was involved in this incident. And one thing I did want to pass on, and some of you may have noticed me scurrying and sort of trying to whisper to everyone, we didn't just learn about this communications-related issue now. We have been dealing with it. We were dealing with it that day. And at Mr. Nastri's instruction, we were working together with our new communications director, to some extent on the fly, trying to communicate what was going on. There were some delays, and we have to build this program. But I think, as Board Member Robinson pointed out, we have to be very careful and not overstep, especially when it's not just an ongoing investigation on our part, but on the part of the fire departments, hazmat, all these different groups. You know, we don't want to cause mass chaos by saying something that steps on their toes. But the point I want to make is we've had multiple meetings internally since the incident. We also just last week, this is multiple groups, compliance, the new communications director, Derek's group as well. We met in El Segundo with the fire department, city manager, and other city personnel relating to refinery-related issues relating to this. And so this process is going forward, and we're in the process of doing it, and we'll report back as next week or as soon as the board wishes. I just want to make sure everyone knows this is not a surprise to us. We've been following it very closely.
Any comments down there? Let's wrap this up. No. Peanut gallery is not quiet. Okay, that concludes our public testimony. We have no closed session. Then that adjourns the April 5th, 2019 meeting of the South Coast Air Quality Management District Board.